Now, in your comments to me, you said twice, and part of this is YouTube's fault because they don't always get a message whenever you get a reply or whatever. So I didn't see him until a few days later. But you keep saying, "What about the contradictions? What about the contradictions? What about the contradictions?" And when I watched your video, you kept saying, "What about all the contradictions? What about all the contradictions?" And it took a while before you actually listed them, and you didn't really explicitly list them all, I don't think. But the two that I got out of your video was there's a contradiction because of naturally occurring monopolies, and there's a contradiction because of advertising. Now, I addressed the advertising. The advertising one is silly. There's no claim in the free market economics that you need to have perfect knowledge, that you can't be influenced by other people, and your analysis of the power of advertisers is absurd. Because, if, like I said in that video, if advertisers had the power you say that you are certain they have, then we would all nobody would ever have cash balances because everyone would all immediately, under the sway of the advertisers, spend all their money that they have on advertising. And also, no company would ever go out of business or lose a profit because they could just pay for advertising and guarantee profits. And since neither of those situations is occurring in the real world, your extremely spurious and false analysis of advertising is it's false. It's doesn't have anything to do with reality and doesn't reflect any free market theories. So you're just making stuff up. And, you're making a straw man, and then you're beating it down, and it doesn't even make any sense. Now, monopolies. Let's say free markets lead to monopolies. That's not a contradiction. I mean, we might say it's a problem. It might be a reason not to have free markets. We might say, well, we don't want to have monopolies, so free markets are bad. It's not a contradiction. So again, I'm glad that you're appealing to Aristotelian logic, but it's not a contradiction even if it's true, and it's not true. Now, you don't provide any kind of theoretical framework as to why monopolies are automatically going to happen. None. You don't explain why it will happen, and you don't really. I mean, you do seem to make an empirical appeal by saying, "Look at history. Look at history." Don't believe in the mythology of history. Well, you believe in the mythology of history. You believe in the myth that we had this awesome, the rankest free market and regulation and workers brought up our standard of living. That's a myth. But you don't provide any concrete examples. I asked in the thing, name one free market monopoly, and I never got a response to that. I ask that question all the time. I never get a response. And although if you can't name a single free market monopoly, it doesn't in itself prove that it's impossible, but it makes it seem like you shouldn't just accept it as axiomatic, which is what you're doing. Now, theoretically, you say that you don't provide any evidence as to why monopolies are going to rise, but you do say that, well, the goal in free markets is to get money. And that's the number one thing. And I don't know if you think this is one of the contradictions or if you think this is what causes monopoly, but it's clearly false. First of all, no free market advocate, whether it be Ayn Rand, Rothbard, Friedman, Bastiat, Adam Smith, none of them ever say, ever have, ever did, ever once said that the number one goal in free markets is to attain as much money as possible. It's never been stated. You don't cite anybody as having said that. You're claiming that that's the truth. Now, I'd like to show right here that if you think that the truth is that the number one goal in free markets is to obtain money, then your attachment to reality is very tenuous. So let's go to Wall Street and let's pick the most corporatist, evil CEO we can imagine. I don't know who. There's probably quite a few we could pick. And what? He lives in a mansion. He's got a limousine. He wears an Italian suit. Maybe he buys cocaine every once in a while. Maybe he's got a yacht, maybe and a private jet. He probably eats at really nice restaurants, and maybe from time to time he pays hookers to have sex with them. Why do I say all that? Because in every single one of those situations, he took his money, which you say is the number one goal of everybody in the free market, and he gave his money away to get something else instead, whether it be a good meal, a yacht, a limousine, a hooker, or a mansion. And whenever you take, if I take my money and I give it to somebody else to get something else in return, what does that prove? That proves that in that instance, in that exchange, you favored the good or service you got more than the money you gave. And so the evil CEO exchanged money for something else that they wanted more than the money, some good or service. And this happens all the time, and not just with CEOs, with everybody. In fact, literally, if you really only cared about money, then you would die, because you would never buy any food. If your very, very childish analysis of reality was literally true, as you impute that it is, then you would never buy food, because you'd be starving and you'd be about to die, and you'd be like, well, I'm going to die, but money's the #1 thing, and so I can't eat an apple because that will cost $1. I'm never going to give up $1 for an apple, because money is the #1 goal in free market capitalism. So he would die. Also, he would literally never stop working. No one would ever engage in leisure if what you're saying is true, because you don't make money during leisure. They just stay in the office until they died. So your contention that money is the #1 goal is not something that any free market economist says. You didn't cite any. It's something you made up. And it's also completely false. As far as your theory of economics goes, it's totally bullshit. Now, let's look at the Austrians. What did the Austrians say? What did Mises say? What did I point out that he said? What's the #1 axiom that you say is ridiculous but you can't refute? The people act for ends. For ends. And sometimes their ends are money, and sometimes their ends are nice restaurants, or yachts, or hookers, or Wheaties, or tennis shoes, or baseball cards. And his analysis of reality strikes me as infinitely more realistic and descriptive of the actual planet than your la-la land, where no one would ever buy anything, because everyone, all they would do is work and get money and hoard it and never spend it, because to spend it, to give it away for something else, proves that you're wrong. So if that was your attempt to prove that monopolies are inevitable, it completely fails. Now, aside from the historical fact that there are no examples of free market monopolies, theoretically it can't happen. Why? Well, for a monopoly to take place, what's one thing that has to happen? Well, the company, the corporation that forms the monopoly has to be profitable, right? I'd like you to agree with that or not. I mean, if it's not profitable, it's not going to be a monopoly. It's going to go out of business, correct? It's going to exhaust its capital, right? And its money. So it has to be profitable to ever have a hope of becoming a monopoly. Well, I know that there's this emotional bias against profit, but what does that mean? If there's a company is profiting, that's telling other entrepreneurs and other rich, greedy capitalists that, hey, they're making a lot of money doing that. We should try and make a lot of money doing that. And they will enter the market. And this happens so often. I mean, and it happens every time, because they're always chasing profits. People are always looking for profits. And if they see a company that's making a lot of profit, which is a prerequisite for it to ever become a monopoly, then they will enter the market as well. And maybe they won't do very well all the time. As long as there's any profit in the market. Now, if profit just disappears, say they're in the business of making they're blacksmiths making shoes for horses, making horseshoes. Yeah, it's possible that they might all fail, but then they're not going to have a monopoly, because they're all going to fail. But as long as there's a demand for the good, then there's going to be an incentive for people to enter the market to try and profit by that demand. And no amount of the business outcompeting its competitors will ever end this process. At no point does it become, well, they defeated so many competitors that I'm not going to try. That's never happened, and it will never happen. I mean, and then this hypothetical, well, they'll just buy everybody out. If there was a situation where it looked like they were going to buy everybody out, then people would just be starting corporations for the sole purpose of getting bought out. And, I mean, unless you're imagining a scenario where the one company has infinite money and can spend as much as it possibly can, and like doing all these buyouts, and still have prices so low that they can't be competed with. It just doesn't make any sense. And the second they try and raise the prices, the big fear is a monopoly is going to lower prices until it puts its competitors out of business, and then it will raise prices. Well, even assuming it was capable of putting all of its competitors out of business through lower prices, which again has never happened, but let's assume that it did. Well, as soon as they jack up their prices, then the incentive for the competition to come in exists. And if they want to stay a monopoly, they can't allow that. They're going to have to keep the prices low. And then what's the harm? So it's never happened. It can't happen. Like it literally can't happen. And so for you to just assume that it automatically will, without any evidence, you don't provide a theoretical framework or argument as to why monopolies will automatically happen. You don't provide any specific historical evidence to that effect. You just say, look at history. Well, I do look at history all the time. And I recommend again the book Triumph of Conservatism by Gabriel Coco, who is a Marxist. Look, the big fat cat industrialists of the progressive era and before, they weren't ever monopolists. They wanted to be. They tried to be monopolists, but they couldn't do it. Because it's always changing too. Like I said, Standard Oil became very wealthy, and they became as much as 90% of the market share. But then what happened? People said, look at all the money they're making. Let's go and find more oil. And Standard Oil got all their oil from like Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York. So people went on looking for oil, and you know what happened before long? They found oil in Texas, and guess what? There's way more oil in Texas and Louisiana than there is in all of the Northeast. And so what happened? Standard Oil lost a huge chunk of market share, and they continued to lose market share until the government came in and outlawed competition. Government came in, no one else is allowed to refine oil except for Standard Oil and Texaco and BP and Shell, Royal Dutch Shell. And that's it. And no other companies have been able to enter that market since then. So you're going to say that's free market capitalism? And it's the same with all of them, with the meat packers, with American Steel. And what would happen is they would try and try and try to form monopolies, or they try and form cartels, and that doesn't work either. I mean, if you have 10 companies that say, let's get together, between us we're 99% of the market, and we'll control the market, and we'll have a monopoly, basically. It doesn't work. Why? Because of those 10 companies, some of them are more efficient than other ones. And the ones that are more efficient could make more money by not being in the cartel. If they say, well, we're going to charge a standard rate, and then the most efficient company in the cartel is going to say, well, we could actually charge a lower rate, and we would get so much more business that we would actually profit even more than we do with the cartel. This happened with the railroads so many times. Coco wrote an entire book just about the railroads to this effect. And every single time their cartels fail. They fail before they even get started. Like, they will get together, they'll talk about it, and they'll say, well, on this date, we'll do it. And before the date would even come, it would already have failed. When did it not fail? When the government regulated. And here you call for government regulation like it's the cure-all of everything, because you have a religion where you believe that democracy and the government can solve everything, and then you accuse free marketers of being utopian. Anyway, the government comes in, and then they create a cartel by force. FDR created cartels in the 1930s. That was what the New Deal was about, practically. It's creating cartels and monopolies. So if you can't provide any historical examples of a free market monopoly, and I beg you, I ask you to try, then I think you should provide a pretty rigorous theoretical framework as to why it would actually happen when in fact it never has. And you shouldn't just take it as axiomatic that it will happen without any evidence. I mean, you're just asserting these things like they're like they're self-evident, and they're not self-evident. They're historically unprecedented, and theoretically they don't even make sense. So I think your arguments are extremely weak. They're not backed up by anything other than name-calling. I mean, your number one retort is just to say Ayn Rand. That's not even an argument, and it's not even true. I'm not an objectivist. I've read one Ayn Rand book, and I didn't even like it that much. So just calling name, I mean, if I just said you're a cult member, does that prove anything? No. I mean, you are a cult member, but I can attack your arguments too. I can show why it won't work. So